Law of sovereignty in operation. The eternal is eternally free. Universal consciousness is sovereignty itself. The infinite is free from all attachments, preferences, and desires. Otherwise, it would not be infinite, because it would be limited by boundaries of duality and multiplicity. Attachments create constraints, and the infinite is unbounded. For example, the infinite is free from the constraints of height, weight, or volume. When consciousness takes form as a being, then the conditions of that type of being apply. In other words, as the eternal expresses in the structure of a being, it accepts the boundaries of that structure. Even when universal consciousness is bounded in a structure, it maintains sovereignty because it knows itself as itself, which is oneness and isness. Revealed in humanity. Sovereignty operates in both the personal realm and the consciousness realm. Commonly, when people talk about sovereignty, they are referring to their personal sovereignty. They might say, "No one can tell me what to do. I am a sovereign human being." Sovereignty directed by the ego is poison fruit because the ego is always concerned with maintaining personal control in life. Personal control means the ego determines the actions to take to get its way instead of connecting with and operating from being. In contrast, consciousness sovereignty means taking action with conscious awareness from being. This sovereignty operates with you as consciousness and is the space of the infinite. It is a state of being resulting from alignment with and embodiment of the eternal. This state is known as living in the flow or experiencing the joy of existing that is more expanded than in the mundane human situation. Consciousness sovereignty in this life involves acting as the eternal and human being you are. Humanity has its place within consciousness, and we have to learn what that place is and operate appropriately. We are once again reminded of the direction in Scripture, "Render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, render unto God that which is God's." In other words, continue to function as human beings while at the same time acknowledging and honoring the beingness of the divine in everything. This means experiencing oneness with the infinite eternal. To exercise your sovereignty as consciousness, you cannot eclipse your beingness or let your persona, projected image, human desires, personal goals, and/or possessions dominate your deeper and greater identity. In other words, put your ego's personal preferences and prejudices in their appropriate supporting roles. This allows free will to come into play because you are liberated from your personal desires. The quickest and most effective way to test your sovereignty is to be tempted by your cravings. When you decline to follow them, you are acting with consciousness sovereignty. To be sovereign in all aspects of life, you cannot be attached to your attachments. Otherwise, they will prevail in your life. Consciousness sovereignty is evident when your life is ruled not by your personal desires, but by laws of being. When you dissolve your ego's prejudices and preferences, you create a condition to move from personal to consciousness sovereignty. You have then placed yourself in the proper position for your work as a conscious being. When you reverse the dominance of your limited view of yourself and how you think you should do things, and instead give precedence to the deeper, higher, and more expansive universal self, then you are progressing beyond unfoldment into isness. As you invert the dominance of your personal self, you become available to be yourself as consciousness. You discover who you are in the joy of existing, and you take action based on eternal guidance, which is the source of conscience. The result is that your actions are proper to time, place, and condition because you are guided by the eternal source. You are free from personal pitfalls, and you embody divine freedom. Your personal human self becomes ancillary to your enduring eternal self. As related in the Scripture, "Not my will, but yours be done." When personal desire results in effective action that sustains life or nurtures well-being, then it aligns with beingness and is no longer exclusively personal. The Christian scriptures include a story of the devil tempting Jesus. The devil is anything that promotes a personal approach over the operations of being. When people live from personal preference, they tend to form attachments. Attachments operate as personal idols and lead people into idolatry, which is the playground of the devil. In Matthew 4, 1-11, Jesus is offered personal gratification and dominion, which includes power. To operate with consciousness sovereignty, Jesus had to give up his personal will and cultural preferences. Sovereignty involves including the whole experience instead of separating or fragmenting aspects of life. For example, wherever there is an emphasis on getting rid of or being afraid of something, such as suffering, that is not sovereignty. Consciousness sovereignty is wholeness. No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. That's a scripture, Matthew 6:24. When you operate from a sense of wholeness, you are free to take proper action in any situation, including the unwelcome ones. When you are in a state of resistance, you are living with fragmentation and separation that disallows sovereignty. The result is the conduits are clogged in the flow of life. If a spiritual promise or proposition such as reaching nirvana or attaining salvation is misunderstood as a personal goal, then the emphasis is on enhancing the personal self, which is a form of ego in operation. Similarly, the view that heaven is a place where people are personally rewarded by a benevolent God is an expression of the external. Focusing the spiritual journey on attaining personal goals is a step along the way until you can focus on the universal or the eternal, thereby replacing your personal preferences with isness. When you are living from isness or connecting with being, you do not envision a particular heaven for your earthly body. Instead, you understand the fullness and continuance of your consciousness that can express in perhaps endless ways. When you operate in and as consciousness, you realize that there is nowhere else to be but where you exist in awareness. You are already part of the unity of all that is. Operating as your place in consciousness is the proper place to be. Power is the ability to produce results, either from wisdom or personal will. The ability to allow and bring forth well-being comes from living in consciousness sovereignty. To produce great results, take action from the sovereignty of oneness. Cultivate the power of wisdom from who you are as consciousness, which includes following laws of being. Sovereignty is the inevitable result of living in accordance with laws of being. It is only narcissistic if attention is centered on the personal. The spiritual journey involves discovering the joy of being as opposed to being driven by personal desires and preferences. You are free to manifest your proper place in the fullness of the eternal. Antithesis. Being ruled by personal desire is the antithesis of sovereignty, because when you are dominated by human desire, your choices are very limited or narrow. You react to maintain personal control or to reinforce the old themes you have rehearsed in life. Similarly, operating solely from a personal viewpoint results in feeling fragmented and incomplete because there are always competing desires, which hinders awareness of the sovereignty available in being. Freedom can never be found by focusing on physical human senses. Since true dominion involves wholeness, and since the human experience involves obstacles, being unable to face or handle pain and suffering interferes with sovereignty. Trying to escape what is yours to resolve will blind you from seeing your responsibilities and duties, which prevents fulfillment and completion. Application. When you operate from laws of being, you experience freedom from personal desires, and you have the opportunity to feel whole and fulfilled. When you act as conscious light, which is your true nature, then you experience authentic sovereignty. To be free from suffering, Learn how to engage consciously with pain, along with all the good and positive experiences. Instead of ignoring or denying affliction, find out how to incorporate it consciously. In oneness, there is no judgment of good, bad, right, wrong, or better than, less than, which would be duality. Consciousness is open. Consciousness is open to all experiences because everything contributes to learning. With awareness, you can balance and dissolve thoughts of suffering and experience the sovereignty of non-judgment and non-duality. When the personal self tries to bypass a challenge, that may preclude you from completing a thought, which interferes with the law of thought. For example, if you get a ticket from a law enforcement officer and you do not want to pay it, choosing to ignore it may eventually result in a warrant for your arrest. Similarly, emotional and spiritual patterns continue until they are completed, which means released into dissolution. For example, similar problems crop up across relationships until they are addressed. Seek your proper place moment to moment by checking in with conscience. Sovereignty does not mean you get to do whatever you want. No one is above the law of incompletion. You experience sovereignty when you are no longer a slave to your desires. Subordinating personal desires can result in disorientation until you adjust to your newfound freedom. This disorientation is caused by a loss of personal identity because people define themselves by their desires. For example, if you identify yourself through a desire for status and respect, until you reorient to your new desire for self-awareness, you might not know where to place your focus. The two possible landmarks people use for orientation are eternal consciousness and personal desires. The first guides you properly. The second can distract you into feeling lost. Ultimately, no longer being hounded by personal desires is a great relief. To experience sovereignty, allow the ego to guide the mundane world under the direction of conscience. Suffering automatically dissipates when you bask in the joy of being.